Well, welcome all. My name is Seth Green, and on an afternoon like this one, I'm especially grateful to say I'm the dean here at the Graham School at the University of Chicago. We are grateful to welcome you to a conversation that we have titled Your Next Chapter Matters, after a core value of the Leadership in Society initiative that is a host of today's conversation. And we are really excited to go into the next chapter of a very special person, Anne Mulcahy, who is the former CEO and chairman of Xerox, and more to the point of today, the then president of the Save the Children board, where she continued to apply much of that leadership in a societal context. And she'll talk about many other ways that she's served society in this chapter of her life as well. For those who are not familiar with the Leadership and Society Initiative, you should be. We are changing the structure of adulthood. The Leadership and Society Initiative supports distinguished leaders in designing meaningful next chapters for themselves and for society. And we do that through a three-part learning journey. And the parts are know oneself, meaning to use humanistic inquiry, a tool that is uniquely used at this university, to deeply understand oneself, one's purpose, one's values, and how those can inform this new chapter of life. Understand the world, where you go deep into a curriculum to look investigatively at the big issues of our time, and to think about how to understand the root causes of societal issues that you care deeply about. And then envision the future, where you actually begin to imagine how, based on your values and based on the issues that you care about in the world, you can design a next chapter of purpose. And we call that document that comes out of the fellowship experience the purpose plan, where your purpose meets social impact. For those who want to learn more, I'll be putting in the chat shortly information about LSI, and we are in a process right now of accepting nominations and candidacies for the 2024-25 cohort, which will begin in late September of 25, and that goes through December 15th, which is our early deadline. I'll just share that we right now have our inaugural cohort of fellows, and you see them here on campus. It's an extraordinary group of people that have really informed our way of thinking about next chapters, and a couple of them are here with us. And so it's nice to see them in the virtual room. But that is not why you are here. You are here to hear from an extraordinary leader who has made this transition with great success and meaning, and that is Anne Mulcahy. And Anne is going to be in conversation with LSI's director, Diana Petty. And so let me turn it over to both of you.
Thank you so much, Seth, and thank you all for being with us. It is a pleasure to see some familiar faces in the Zoom room, but also many new faces. So welcome to the LSI community. And we are just beyond privileged to have Anne Mulcahy not only with us today, but she has been an instrumental advisor to the initiative over the process of our design and development. And so, Anne, I mean, you had an extraordinary tenure at Xerox, culminating in being chairman and CEO for 18 years. You then went on to play significant leadership role at the Save the Children Federation, including being chair of the board, and you continue to be highly involved in their leadership and many other socially driven efforts and organizations. So thank you for being with us, Anne. In so many ways, you are the exemplar and the role model of the type of leader we hope to catalyze through our efforts at the Leadership and Society Initiative. So just to kind of pique everyone's interest and give a bit of a primer of where we hope to go in this conversation with you, could you give us just the kind of 10,000-foot view of your story, your time at Xerox, how you made your way there, and also just a quick snapshot of your encore chapter at Save the Children, and then we'll dig in more to each of those as we go.
Great. Well, thanks, Diana. It's wonderful to be with all of you. I think when I first heard about the concept of LSI, I was really intrigued and inspired by the thought that we could actually structure a way for people to think about their next chapter, and particularly as it relates to having social impact. So I'm a big believer, and which is why I've been engaged. But yeah, I actually didn't start at Xerox. I actually started in financial services, but that was in 1974, and it wasn't exactly an enlightened place. And I think I went to Xerox actually because of their reputation. They were actually ahead of the curve in areas like diversity and a focus on values and culture, and which really appealed. And I started in sales, so not exactly a high level entree, but a wonderful learning experience when you learn about your business through the eyes of customers. So a lot of time in sales and marketing and staff roles and business units. I ran HR for 3 years, so worked across the company, and at around 2000 was approached to become CEO, and it was actually a really tough time at the company. It had really run into trouble, and actually was on the verge of bankruptcy. They had actually just ousted a CEO who had come in and only been there for a couple of years. So in many ways, it was more of a mission than a job, just a company that I cared deeply about. I had been with for 20 years. So I really wanted to be part of the solution. So yeah, began a really actually tough journey for a few years of restructuring the company, getting customer focus back, building back, discipline and business processes and cash economics, and getting the company really to be able to focus on a more sustainable future. So it wasn't really, quote, I never thought about it as a turnaround. It turned out to be one, but it was always much more of getting to a spot where this company could be a great company again. But in 2003, we lost about $300 million, which certainly was a pretty sobering place to be. But by 2006, we were back to making over $1 billion. So it was incredibly rewarding. It was a great company, great people. I learned so much during that experience. Probably the most important one to me was about followership. And, we kind of maybe now call it servant leadership, but, really aligning your community of employees around shared goals, and creating the inspiration that they want to have impact. Super important. Communicating and making sure that people find themselves in the story. You don't do that on PowerPoint slides. You actually have to, have some passion about where the company's going, and be able to convey that to people so that they feel motivated. And purpose, right? People always want to feel like they're doing something important, that they have impact, and that they have impact on something that they view is important to them. So that followership and personalization of the mission was hugely important to our success over that period of time. So I wound up being a CEO for just about 10 years, which is a long run. And it was a pretty intense time in my life. So I wasn't giving a lot of thought to what comes next, which is, I think, the case with lots of executives who are in big jobs that don't leave a lot of room for thinking about their future. And it was a hard transition. It was harder than I expected. You go from the most, intense, experience. I had 90,000 employees, and a huge company to run, and a lot of responsibility. And you kind of feel like you fall off a cliff. So it was not the easiest transition. And when I sought out advice, it was interesting. I heard that, hey, you got to strike while the iron's hot, because you have limited shelf life, and just kind of get stuff, fill that calendar quickly, because people forget about you quickly. I had lots of recommendations to go to private equity. It's kind of like the resting ground for retired CEOs, and obviously a lot of CEOs do that and do it well. I did have some public boards, which, were great. And I loved kind of keeping my hand in the business community, but it certainly didn't feel like enough for me. I needed to kind of transfer my purpose someplace that was far more fulfilling than kind of some part-time business roles. So I actually got a visit from Tom Murphy, who was at that time the chairman of ABC Cap Cities, or he had just retired, and Cokie Roberts, the journalist, who were both on the Save the Children board. And they made a pretty impassioned plea. I had worked with Save the Children while I was at Xerox doing. We had a big foundation. We were a very socially conscious company, so I had had some experience with them, but I had never really quite given thought to a more robust role with Save the Children. But they were the A team, and they actually certainly were very persuasive. And we agreed that I would come in to Save the Children, and if I felt that it was a good fit and purpose, they would like me to chair the board.
Extraordinary. So thank you, Anne, for kind of laying that out. I want to return to a few pieces and dig in a layer deeper, if you will. So at this inflection point, when your time at Xerox is starting to come to a close, you described, I mean, I can still hear it in your voice, just the love of this place and the culture and the community that you were so instrumental in building there as well. And you start to get this advice, as you described, strike while the iron's hot. You're getting, kind of enticing offers from private equity. Can you just share a little bit more? Because I think many folks in our audience are considering or imagining that similar type of inflection point from their longstanding careers. What was that like, those kind of first few years following Xerox, as you started to experiment? Just how did that shake out for you?
Well, I think it was some experimentation. It didn't all go well, I would say. I kind of bounced around a bit. I remember I actually became a guest contributor and guest host on CNBC for a while. And I hated it. It was just, I was kind of committed for a period of time, but it just wasn't where I wanted to be, or didn't feel like a good fit. I did find some things that, kind of started to strike me as being within the zone of things I wanted to do. And, part of it was clearly mentorship, next generation talent. So that got me started. And I've continued to do that and have, I mentor CEOs and talented executives and love that. And that's been a good fit. I did try private equity, and it just was not a good fit. It was not really of great interest to me. And so, I quickly within, a reasonable period of mine, said, hey, I think, I needed a focal point, right? Something that felt like it was my anchor, that I could really devote myself to. All of this other stuff could be done, public boards and, mentoring, the things that I loved, but I needed something that was more substantive and where I could really dedicate more of my time and energy and make a difference. And that's really when I decided to really take on a much bigger role at Save the Children. And I would say part of this was a really great fit for me. I've always kind of believed that, if you want to do your part to change the world, that changing the trajectory of a child's life is probably one of the best places to be. So it had great appeal to me from that perspective. I love their mission. I love what they focused on. I mean, they're on education and healthcare and child safety. They're global. And, as I began my role as chair of the board, I decided I really wanted to understand in a very deep way their work. So I traveled around the world with them, and, they happened to work where kids are most at risk. So as you would expect, I went to places like Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and all over Africa and Nepal. I've been in Gaza and the West Bank, and so it was incredibly important to be able to have that personal, deep knowledge of their work, so that I could be a more effective board leader. And quite frankly, I had a better opportunity as well to raise resources for the work, which was super important.
Incredible. So you described making the decision to join Save the Children, and that you got this very compelling sort of pitch and enticing offer to get involved.
Yeah.
But I'd love to understand a little bit more. I'm sure that I would imagine, you're hearing it, you're feeling this call, but the actual act of making that shift, there's so many forces and considerations at play. Can you tell us a little bit more about what ultimately that sort of making that leap of faith almost was like for you?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's a little bit scary because and I have to say, I mean, I got lucky in many ways that they found me. That doesn't always happen, which is why I love your program, because I think it's a way to actually identify those good fits, those places where you can make a difference. I was fortunate. Um, but I didn't, it wasn't exactly like I had had a developmental pathway into this role, and you don't know how your capabilities will translate into a very different environment. I'd spent 30 years in business, and this was going to be so much new that it was a little scary. And I worried, and that's why I kind of threw myself so much into kind of the learning mode of making sure that I understood the organization. There are certainly, and we can talk about it, but there's so many things that do translate well, right? From, the business public company world to a place like Save the Children. But certainly it's a dramatic shift in terms of, the environment and your responsibilities, and certainly the mission. So yeah, I'd say, I was a bit hesitant, and a bit worried, and really wanted to go on a learning curve mission to make sure that I was credible for that role.
Right. So I do want to talk about what you alluded to in this idea of what, strengths and expertise and capabilities can be translated. So Anne, I mean, if you maybe could share examples from your experience of, it's clear that Save the Children shaped you in so many meaningful ways, but how do you feel you brought your, unique set of gifts to shape them, and then maybe to generalize out more broadly for, folks who are wondering about this for themselves? In what ways do you feel that leaders from one particular sector or context are able to make those transitions and translations to be able to meaningfully lead in these next stages?
I think it's one of the things that I'm so excited about, because I believe there's actually such a rich portfolio of capabilities that translates so well into, whether it's the nonprofit or government or, academic. I think we'd all be better served if we actually had some of those kind of cross-sector experiences. But yeah, it was really wonderful how much I was able to bring to Save the Children. And I mean, there's basic things that things like risk management and financial discipline and execution and all those things that we learn so well in business. But a really specific example is I brought some kind of loaned executives into Save the Children to basically deploy training for Lean Six Sigma and Lean. I mean, Save the Children, it's like a big organization. It's global. It's, over $1 billion organization. And, that need for efficiency and making sure that as many dollars as possible are going to the children in need and not being wasted with bureaucracy and poor processes and all of that is so incredibly important. Well, to this day, that's a big part of Save the Children now, is their capabilities to really be efficient and eliminate waste and have one of the best ratios in the nonprofit industry in terms of dollars that go to children. I think I would also say that, your ability to kind of support and coach and be a good mentor to the staff. We know a lot about talent management and development and really good, human resource processes. And I think, Save the Children has this amazing, loyal and passionate staff, but I was able to kind of really bring a support level to that staff that was super important. And I have to tell you, running a board, right? Running a nonprofit board, 34 members, it's not trivial. And, these are talented, wonderful people, but they need to be leveraged to make Save the Children a better organization. So that ability to kind of harness that great set of talents and energies and capabilities and make sure they're channeled to have the best possible impact is a pretty big role in itself.
And so I have just a couple more questions, but then I do want to open it up to audience Q&A. So that's your quick primer, audience, for getting your questions ready.
Yeah.
So Anne, because of your truly inspiring journey and the leadership that you've had in these different spaces, and, in the new role that you're in, people are regularly coming to you for advice on how to make this kind of transition. So if we may be so bold, what's your top advice that you give for people thinking about this shift in their lives?
Well, I think number one, I think people need to see the possibilities of, I think it's a model for the future, right? I think we have a world full of very complex, difficult problems that clearly are not going to be solved by single sectors. And this is a time where we need the best and the brightest to start collaborating in ways to solve some of these issues. And so I think it's just this huge opportunity. But I tell people to be thoughtful, to take the time to understand what the right fit is. And, I'll come back to your program and having a structured way to walk through, understanding, kind of peeling back who you are, right? And having a sense of, okay, I know the things that really make me tick and that, will fulfill this part of me that makes for a great next chapter. And to really think about, optimizing your contributions and impact for the future. And, kind of the opposite of kind of everything I heard, which was take the good time to try to get it right. Don't do the traditional inevitable kind of knee-jerk reaction to retirement that I think has become a bit of a ritual for retiring executives at time. Be creative and thoughtful about expanding that aperture to include choices that may not have been on your radar screen before. And don't underestimate how all of that great experience translates to so many different and exciting roles. And for those that feel like I do, which is, if you're lucky enough to have a successful business career and, wind up with, you really don't need to make a lot more money. you don't need to be a CEO again. That, I kind of feel like we have this obligation to pay it forward, and that we should almost feel like, this is almost a service that we should feel compelled to give back and somehow contribute to solving the big problems that our world faces. And that can be in any number of ways across multiple sectors. But somehow I do think that feeling that sense of contribution makes for a much richer and fulfilling experience post your business career.
Right. Thank you so much, Anne. Just one last one, and then we'll open it up. You've spoken very eloquently about sort of the way a program like LSI can help individuals sort of have some structure for navigating this very complex transition. But as we've been so fortunate to have you sort of watch our maturing process over the past year and a half, I'm curious if there's, also, as you said, there are complex issues out there, and it really is going to take many incredible minds to move the needle on them.
Yeah.
So how do you see on that societal scale, like a program like LSI being able to, deepen and broaden impact in meaningful ways?
Well, and it's kind of some of the aspects I talked about. I mean, I do think self-assessment's a really important. I mean, it sounds kind of like, of course, you know who you are after all these years in business, but the reality is it's been a long time since you really thought about, what makes you tick and what really do you value, and where are the things that your strengths, and how do they align with things that you like to do, where you can make a contribution. I think also the role that LSI can play is opening up that aperture too, right? I think sometimes we really do limit our thinking in terms of where we can fit and make a contribution, and we all like to kind of operate in our wheelhouse and where we feel comfortable. And I would tell you, I went out of my wheelhouse. There's no question about it. And it's certainly the most rewarding thing I've done over this last decade. So I think opening up the aperture, not just in terms of self-assessment and exploration, but even connecting the dots then, having exposure to, government, advocacy, nonprofits, academia. I mean, really stretching your thinking about where you can be part of that solution. And I mean, I kind of think that's sort of a never-ending journey too. I mean, as you know, I mean, I continue to build on. Now I'm involved with the Nature Conservancy because I just have this feeling that this is such an important issue that I had to do something that was not just personal. It had to be, a broader impact. And so yeah, trying to have a more systemic approach to how I can make a contribution on all these incredible concerns about environment. So yeah, I think I know how much I would have benefited from that in many ways. As I said, I think I got lucky, but I also stumbled along the way and did a lot of things that, I joined a board or two that it was like, oh, what have I done? And the CNBC thing. And I just, made a lot of mistakes. And I think if I had been more thoughtful, if I had had a more structured approach to working through it, I might have been a little bit more efficient in my decision making, for sure.
Great. Well, Anne, thank you for your deeply impactful leadership and for sharing your journey with us. I'll start with just a few audience questions that are in the chat, but I'll invite folks to use the raise hand function as well, and glad to call on you to ask questions live. So Margot asks, for folks who have meaningful leadership experience that is not necessarily on your resume, right? People who have done volunteer work, led community organizations, served on boards. What, thoughts do you have on ways in which those types of leaders who don't fall categorically into the sort of CEO label
Right.
are able to leverage and deploy those capabilities and that expertise, to drive their kind of next chapter forward?
Yeah. Well, I think it's actually one of the great things about, if you will, shifting sectors is that, it's not necessarily the traditional resume that is the end all and be all for, that next role you're going to play. And I think actually a lot of those other experiences get valued, when you are kind of starting to look for that next chapter out of maybe a strict kind of business background. So I know now I do a lot of succession searches, right? For Save the Children, for Nature Conservancy. I run their succession committees all the time. And I look for that, right? I'm looking and saying, hey, have you done, have you had nonprofit experiences? I mean, bringing that in with a business background is probably, one of the ideal areas. Have you been a mentor and a coach, and have you done things outside of that job description that actually are transferable and valuable in a new role? So I think it's an opportunity to really highlight that full portfolio of lifetime experiences in a way that will be valued in a lot of these kinds of opportunities.
Great. So this question from Michael actually dovetails nicely with sort of what you were just describing about what you look for and trying to find encore talent. So he asks, while at Save the Children, did you find that you were looking for talent in your network to fill certain roles or needs among those in their encore phase? And are other colleagues of yours in similar roles at large nonprofits also networking for that kind of encore later in life talent, plugging it in strategically?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the valuable things you bring to those roles is your Rolodex, right? It's your network. And, I have great examples of, particularly for board members, right? I mean, to be able to tap into, I brought Mary Dillon, was the CEO of Ulta, onto the Save the Children board. And it wound up to be one of the most incredible partnerships that, Save the Children has had. So lots of examples, I think, of tapping into the people that you know. I also tap into the people I know for, yes, roles at Save the Children, for jobs like resource development and marketing, where I know there's these incredible transferable skills that will be a good fit for Save the Children. So I think, yeah, your network is so incredibly invaluable on multiple dimensions, right? Certainly, sourcing talent, you know, board members, by the way, raising resources, right? And, getting people who maybe don't want to be a formal part of the organization, but want to be a part of the mission and be contributors as well. So I think there's, yeah, a ton of opportunities to take advantage of that network and make and the organization can be the beneficiary of all of those people that you know.
Great. Really exciting questions in the chat, so I hope you're ready, Anne. So this one comes from Constance, who mentions that this kind of intersection of thinking about who you are and what you bring and who you want to become at this next stage is really intriguing as you think about leadership for society and driving meaningful social impact. So she asks, Anne, who did you work with as you explored your own future contributions? You mentioned that you were getting this kind of typical projected advice for someone who was at your level of seniority, but what was the most helpful advice that you got in that transition from Xerox to what would come next?
So I think, and I do think that's a little bit of the risk when you go to the usual suspects for advice. Sometimes you get kind of the stay in your lane kind of advice that, may not be appropriate. But for me, I wound up actually becoming a friend of Cokie Roberts. And during that period of time, and I don't know for those that you that know Cokie, but she's like this amazing, she was a journalist and obviously a TV newscaster, but so we didn't share a lot of, common experiences, but she really opened up my eyes to thinking about the, Save the Children in a way that was inspiring, and what the possibilities were, and thinking about the difference that you can make in an organization like that. And she happened to be one of the most giving, philanthropic, good hearts in the world. But I think she was the one who really kind of convinced me that I had this blend of opportunity and obligation that was coming together to actually step up and take this role at Save the Children. So yeah, kind of a non-traditional source of guidance. It didn't come from my usual sources, and I have to say the other thing was my family, right? My family was super excited about this possibility, my kids. And I wound up literally taking my kids traveling to Save the Children locations and having them experience something that I think has changed their lives. Um, so yeah, I think it came from sources that probably weren't the same sources I used for some of my business choices.
So John asks to dive a little bit more into kind of the differences in culture between large public companies
Yeah.
and large nonprofit companies. So, you mentioned that you brought things like Six Sigma and greater
Right.
efficiency to Save the Children. But when you arrived there, what sort of surprised you in a positive way about the current culture at Save the Children or Nature Conservancy that was different than where you had been before?
Well, you know what? I mean, probably one of the biggest difference is you really have to think about the people who work at Save the Children as volunteers. They're not there to make a ton of money, and they're not necessarily there to move up the career ladder. They are there because they believe in the work and they're mission driven. And so I think there's a lot more, if you will, when, in a public company, it's kind of like they know who the boss is. And they kind of, march to that drum. Whereas at a place like Save the Children, they better feel inspired and motivated in terms of the work that they're doing, or else they'll go someplace else. And they're not there sometimes for the traditional reasons of money and career advancement. And so it's a very different culture from that perspective. That was a big learning for me. And I think it's super interesting. It actually calls for really great leadership. Because you don't have some of those tools and mechanisms you have in public companies to align people around a goal.
Right. So with regrets, we have time for just one more question, and then we have to move into breakouts where we can definitely continue the conversation. So Anne, just the last one I would say from the chat, Chuck asks, what advice do you have for how people can develop a sabbatical mindset, to really take this, you mentioned this, right? Like taking the time to step back and examine themselves and really ruminate on what might be right in this next chapter.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because I do think there's a natural kind of fear and you know um, need to kind of fill the gap, fill that gap as quickly as you can. And I think if you talk to any successful retired executive, they will acknowledge they did some things too quickly. You know, they tried to fill their dance card too quickly, made mistakes, turned out to maybe not be as fulfilling as they had hoped it would be. So yeah, I would listen to that counsel and ensure that you have the discipline to take the time before you start kind of filling that dance card, if you will. And that's why I do think you know, a structured approach is super helpful because it kind of gives you um a feeling of you're not wandering, right? You're not kind of aimlessly, you know, poking at what the opportunities might be. But you know, I would look at it and say, you know, a year to kind of think through, be very conscious about the choices that you make, um, and have a very clear view of, you know, what makes you tick and how you're going to be engaged in something that truly can be as fulfilling or more fulfilling as, you know, your career to date. So yeah, I think it's got to be a discipline and a structure to take the time and truly evaluate the full possibility of choices.
Great. Well, Anne, it is always a pleasure to be with you, and thank
Same
you for
here.
this time and all the ways in which you have strengthened LSI truly. So with that, we will now
Yes.
move to the breakout segment of our conversations. We will wish you a wonderful holiday next week, Anne.
Same, and thanks